has the city of Sodom been discovered in the northern end of the Dead Sea. How strong is the biblical and archaeological evidence for Sodom being identified with what's known as Tal el-Hammam? Our guest today, Dr. Stephen Collins, a practicing archaeologist and the director of the School of Archaeology at Veritas International University, believes he has discovered the site of the Old Testament's most infamous city. Dr. Collins, it's great to see you again. Really appreciate you coming on. Let me just start with this. As an archaeologist, what interested you in excavating and trying to find the ancient city of Sodom?
Well, it's pretty interesting that I used to hold the southern view, the southern Dead Sea view. I went along with everybody else. In fact, it was a 1993 documentary that I think aired on CBS, something like that. And I'm touting the southern Sodom. And but in about 1996, I was leading a group of students through the Holy Land, and I had on my itinerary Sodom and Gomorrah, Babadra and Numira over on the Jordan side of the Dead Sea. And so I thought, okay, we're going to be there tomorrow. So I pulled my Bible out, and I was just going to brush up and read through the text. And so I did. And I got to the end. I started in Genesis 13, went all the way down through Genesis 28, 29. And when I got through reading it, I thought to myself, I don't see anything in any of this that would locate Sodom toward the south end of the Dead Sea. Maybe I'm sleepy. So I kind of sat up in bed and I tried to shake the sleep off. And I read it. Actually, I wound up reading the Sodom passages about 4 more times that evening. And when I got to the end of it, I thought, not only is there nothing in the geography of these texts to locate Sodom toward the south end of the Dead Sea, in fact, everything I'm seeing would locate it north and east of the Dead Sea. Now, we had just started excavating in the West Bank that very year, and I wasn't looking for a project. But in the year 2000, we shut down the excavation at Khirbet el-Maqadir. We were excavating with Bryant Wood there. And when we shut that excavation down, I got to thinking, wait a minute, we don't have an archaeological project going on now. Well, something's got to give. So I thought, the Sodom issue. So I started, in fact, I put in right then, this was in the winter of early in the winter, like January, February 2020. And I thought, I need to put in to do a paper at the Near East Archaeological Society on this subject, because if I don't, I won't do the research. I'll find an excuse. I'll get sidetracked. So I put in for the paper, started to do the research, and the more I researched it, the bigger the pile got.
Wow! And
we soon realized that not only was there no case for a southern Sodom, zero. Not geographically, not chronologically, not culturally, but there was every 100% of all of the evidence that we began to put together was solidified north and east of the Dead Sea. And so that was the nuts and bolts of just using the biblical text to identify the proper geographical location. But of course, then you have to carry it from there and get on the ground.
Gotcha. Now, before we get into some of the evidence for this northern site you referred to, maybe tell us, based on the biblical text, what we should expect to find if we actually did locate the site of the biblical Sodom and Gomorrah.
Well, if you're going to locate a lost city, biblically, you need basically, I always say 3 things. You need right place, right time, right stuff. So those big 3. And of course, in the passage in Genesis 13, it was very clear that Lot could see the cities of the plain, the cities of the Jordan Valley, from the location around Bethel and Ai, where he and Abraham were camping. So they had pitched their tents at Bethel and Ai, and that's north of the Dead Sea, essentially, about 10 miles north of Jerusalem. And from that location, it said he lifted up his eyes and looked over and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan, and that's the Jordan, by the way, not the Dead Sea. The Jordan means the descending of the fresh water, which ends at the north end of the Dead Sea. And so he looked over and he could see that the entire plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the Garden of Yahweh, like the land of Egypt, which it is. It's like a little Nile in miniature. And it says then he traveled eastward from Bethel and Ai and pitched his tent as far as Sodom. Now, all of that's happening north of the Dead Sea. The Jordan Valley, the Jordan River ends according to Scripture, at the Bay of the Dead Sea, at the mouth of the Jordan, below Pisgah, which is Mount Nebo. So it's right there at the north end. It's exactly where it should be. And we did get on the ground and confirm it, by the way. Now we know that Tal el-Hammam, Sodom, is the largest continuously occupied Bronze Age city in the entire southern Levant. That would include Israel and Jordan. So it's big. And it's in the time of Abraham. It was destroyed in the time of Abraham in the Middle Bronze Age, in the Middle Bronze II period, which is in contrast to the southern site. Baba Dra was destroyed around 2500 BC, which is about 400 or 500 years before the earliest possible time of Abraham. And so those cities were early Bronze Age. They did not exist during the time of the patriarchs. Time of the biblical patriarchs from Terah, Abraham's father, onward is the Middle Bronze II period.
Okay, so if we were going to go to Tal el-Hammam today, what would we see? What is it like? How big is it? Describe that area today for us.
Of course, the general area of it is called in the Bible, the plain of the Jordan, and the cities of the plain. The word plain there is the word kikar in Hebrew. It means a circle or a disc. In fact, traffic circles in Jerusalem today are called kikar. So
really?
It's a circular area of the alluvial plain of the southern Jordan Valley. And that particular area actually has a road, an ancient road that runs along the eastern side of it. And when you move today along the highway there, which actually is the roadbed of the ancient road, then you're going to run right into a very, very large city, right on the edge of that valley, right on the edge of the eastern Kikar. It rises up the lower city. It's about 1 kilometer from one end to the other, by the way. So sometimes people don't know they're actually looking at an archaeological site. They think they're looking at a large natural mountain, but they're not. The lower city is about 500 meters across. It rises 100 feet above the surrounding plain, and the upper city rises another 100 feet above the lower city. It's a massive site. The lower city has 62 acres inside the city wall and about another couple of hundred acres on the site platform between two major perennial rivers or wadis. So it's really on the upper end. It's in the 1% of city size for the Levant in antiquity. So it's really, really large. What's interesting about that is that nobody knew it was there, except for the Jordanians. Everybody on the Jordan side of the river knew it was there. They had done surveys. In fact, we found 14 major archaeological sites in that area. It wasn't just one big site. It was one big site with a whole lot of satellite towns and villages. So it's really a major city-state. It is probably the biggest controlling city-state in the southern Levant during the Bronze Age. And by the way, if you compare that to the size of Baba Dra, you can put about 6 or 7 Baba Dras inside the city wall of Tal el-Hammam. In fact, Baba Dra isn't even large enough wouldn't even be large enough to qualify as one of the bigger satellites of Tal el-Hammam. So Baba Dra is a little tiny marginal city that went out of business when the climate changed toward the end of the early Bronze Age, about 2500 BC. Abraham really belongs in the 18th century BC. This is very important information because archaeologically, even Jerusalem is not even occupied between 2500 BC and about 1800 BC. There's nobody there. That's just an archaeological fact. So we have to get Abraham post 1800 BC. And I think you had a recent discussion with Dr. Craig Olson.
I did.
On the issue of how to understand the biblical lifespan numbers in the book of Genesis in that regard. But culturally, also, Abraham does belong to the Middle Bronze Age. This is the height of Canaanite civilization. And a nomadic herdsman like Abraham would in no way have been able to get rich in that earlier period to which many people ascribe his life. The Middle Bronze Age is the time when someone like him could get very, very rich dealing with the great city-states, the Middle Bronze city-states of the southern Levant, of the area of Israel and Jordan. So everything fits. el-Hammam is in exactly the right place where the Bible describes Sodom. It's in the right time frame. It has all the cultural accoutrements. It is a major city. It's hugely fortified. It has a massive gateway system for both the lower and upper cities. It has a big sacred area, big temple area. The last 5 years, we've been excavating the palace complex. The palace footprint is just slightly larger than the White House. So it's big. The whole thing is big. The outer walls of the palace are over 2 meters thick.
Wow.
So it's a massive, massive city. It's wealthy. The ceramics and the finds that we're discovering and that we're unearthing are just pretty amazing. Pretty stunning, actually, that there's such a high level of civilization at this time in the valley that nobody seems to have known about up until we started our project about 15 to 20 years ago. So what I always tell people is that, before we started, we had a blank map. On that side of the river, northeast of the Dead Sea, there was nothing. There wasn't a city. Nobody had anything on the map. Now we have over 14 major archaeological sites with el-Hammam at the center of them, northeast of the Dead Sea. And the biggest city-state, longest lasting city-state in the history of that region for the Bronze Age. Why didn't people find it before? Because people misread the scripture, number one. They were looking toward the south end of the Dead Sea for the cities of the plain. And by the way, we can probably blame that on the great archaeological scholar of the 20th century, W.F. Albright.
Albright, huh?
Now, Albright was a genius, but not in this regard. I think he was rather geographically challenged when it came to the location of Sodom. He basically, he knew that Babadra and Nimir and those early Bronze Age sites couldn't in any way be Sodom and Gomorrah. He knew that. He knew Abraham belonged to the Middle Bronze period, but where were they? So he put them underneath the water at the south end of the Dead Sea in that shallow basin south of the Lisan Peninsula. And of course, that's a really dumb place to put a city, because every time you get enough rain, the whole area floods. And by the way, it dried up now. Nothing is going into the Dead Sea's dropping like crazy. No water going into the Dead Sea, so it's dropping lower and lower. The Dead Sea lower basin has been only artificially filled with water for the last 20, 30 years. And archaeologists have been down there looking at it. There isn't a sherd of pottery in that whole area. There never was a city there. Like I said, it would have been a really dumb place to put your town, because every time it rained, you'd be flooded. So there was nothing there. Albright just put it in a place where he thought it might be. Turned out that wasn't the case. But if he had read scripture, he would have seen very, very clearly that it was located northeast of the Dead Sea. And so when you put all of these threads together, what we say is that if people had paid attention, if scholars, archaeologists had paid attention to the biblical narrative, which clearly locates Sodom northeast of the Dead Sea, had they paid attention to that, they would have discovered all of these cities a long time ago. And but they didn't. They didn't take the biblical text seriously. In fact, so many scholars believe that these were mythical cities in the first place.
Right.
They didn't even believe they existed. So why would you look for a city that's in a mythical story
That makes
And
sense.
yeah, so but they are
So,
in fact there, and they're big. And the only reason why they exist on the maps today, or they're starting to be included on the maps, is because we did pay attention to the biblical story of Sodom. We did do our due diligence on the geography. We did go there. We've been excavating there for the last 17 years, back in the field in
17 years.
January. Yeah,
Wow.
back in the field in January. We'll be there for season 16, and very exciting. We're looking forward to that. But
That's great.
it's
Let
it's
me,
a major site, Sean. It's just people just
yeah,
it's hard to wrap your mind around how big and important Sodom was in antiquity. And so
yeah.
it's no wonder that if you go back to Genesis 10, it's actually mentioned among the great, in the same breath almost, with the great
Mm,
cities of Mesopotamia. So the cities of the plain, the cities of that Jordan Valley are were important, and today are important, and you can't really understand the archaeology of the region without Tal al-Hammam.
very, very interesting. We're going to go into some of these specifics and break it down a little bit, but just to place it, you've got the Jordan going north above the Dead Sea. The Kikar, the plain area, goes west over Israel and east into Jordan. Is that correct as far as the Kikar is concerned, the plain area?
That's right. It's a big
Okay,
circle, a circle-ish. It even looks like a circle on a satellite map. Of course, the Bible writers didn't have access to those.
of course.
They looked at it on the ground. But when you stand in the middle of it, actually on the ground, and you kind of twirl a 360 from the middle of it, you see what it is. It's a widened alluvial plain or valley that is basically a green disc, and it includes the left side and the right side. In fact, remember, Genesis 13 says it's watered like Egypt. Well, how's Egypt watered? Well, it has a river running right down the middle of it.
Yep,
Well, so does this. It's got the Jordan River running right down the middle of the Kikar, and not only that, it
that's amazing.
overflowed its banks in antiquity. The Jordan River overflowed just like the Nile, and people would plant behind the receding water in the newly deposited silt. And so it is a kind of a Nile in miniature. And that's exactly what the Bible says about it.
So if this is the right area, Genesis 13, when Lot has a choice to go to the plains that are watered and elsewhere, he chose the plains you're describing. Abraham goes somewhere else. Hence, he settles in Sodom. Is that right? According to Genesis 13, that's how the story would play out if we have the
Yeah,
location correct?
Abraham said, yeah, a Lot comes to Abraham one day and says, our shepherds are fighting each other, and, we're not getting along. We have too many people and too many animals for such a space as we have. We need to separate. Abraham says, okay, you go to the left, I'll go to the right. Pick a location. It says from that moment, Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the whole circle, the Kikar of the Jordan, was well watered,
Mm-hmm.
like the garden of Yahweh in the land of Egypt. And he then traveled eastward and pitched his tent as far as Sodom. And then it says, and Abraham stayed in the land of Canaan. Canaan traditionally is on the west side of the Jordan River.
Yep.
The cities of the Kikar are located on the far east
Hmm.
side of that Kikar on the east side of the Jordan River. So
Hmm.
Lot really chose a good area. Now, he did respect Abraham. Let's not criticize Lot too much for being greedy and taking the best land, the best water, which, by the way, he did. But God had promised the land of Canaan to Abraham, and that was typically on the west side of the
That
river.
makes sense.
So he left the land promised to Abraham, and he left that territory, crossed the Jordan River, and went to the cities of the Kikar on the opposite side of the Jordan. And what's interesting about that is that that area it is the best watered agricultural land in the region.
Oh, interesting.
You don't need rain. You have the Jordan River, plus you have a massive amount of water disgorging from the Transjordan Aquifer into that area. Springs run out all over the place there today. the city of Sodom itself had two springs, one warm, one cold, inside the city. And so they had hot and cold running water actually coming out of the ground.
Wow.
So there's so much water on that side that it is water like Egypt. And the point of stating that for Moses noticing that was that you don't need rain to survive. What's interesting about that is around 2500 BC, all of the cities in the southern Levant went belly up. They all crashed because of climate change. But Tal el-Hammam and all of its satellite towns did not. They thrived. In fact, they got bigger. So for about 400 years, from about 2500 BC down to about 2100 or 2000 BC, Tal el-Hammam was the only operational urban center, fortified city-state in the entire southern Levant. And why was it able to survive? It was able to survive because it has such a great hydrological situation there. They have lots of water. So, but on the flip side of that, when about 1700 BC, when everybody else continued happily into the late Bronze Age, Tal el-Hammam and all of its satellite towns and villages came to a screeching halt and were all destroyed by a cosmic fiery airburst event.
Okay, let me rudely cut in. We're getting there. Not yet. I want to lay out the case to that destruction and your theory on this. But first off, you wrote a Biblical Archaeological Review article in 2013, and you mentioned in there that in the 19th century, many scholars, archaeologists, thought that the northern area was where Sodom would be. And then it shifted. Many started moving towards the south. Were you the first in your team to suggest Tel el-Hammam as it specifically, or had others located that site before your team?
That was a really interesting and eye-opening thing when we discovered how many of the 19th century explorer scholars had actually been there at the site. Now, of course, this was before, the 1880s, for example, when Thompson and Tristram and Wilson of Wilson's Arch fame, in Jerusalem, and all these guys were there. They all came to the area of Tal el-Hammam, and they concluded that this was the proper area for Sodom and the cities of the plain, according to the Bible. They followed the text exactly like we did. So virtually all the scholars who worked in that area, and they were there for years and years and years, they located the cities of the plain north of the Dead Sea. In fact, I have an 1888 Bible that my grandfather gave me, and I went and looked at the map, the Bible map in that book, and guess where the cities of the plain are located? They're located north of the Dead Sea.
Interesting.
And so that was because almost everybody back in the 19th century located it properly northeast of the Dead Sea. The problem was that Edward Robinson in the same time frame came for a couple of months and went around, and he suggested Sodom was at the south end of the Dead Sea, mainly because if you've ever been to the south end of the Dead Sea, it does look like a place God would have destroyed. I mean, it's pretty salty and nasty and barren. But that was about it. There wasn't any geography to it. And it seems that W.F. Albright picked up on Edward Robinson's take on the location of Sodom and went in that direction when everybody else had completely gone in the opposite end of the Dead Sea. So because Albright was so powerful of a scholar, and the evangelical just loved him, everybody went south. They just went to the south of the Dead Sea for Sodom. And but as you go there, in fact, it was interesting to read in William Thompson wrote a book called The Land, and two or three volumes called The Land and the Book. He spent 40 years riding around on a horse in the second half of the 19th century with a Bible over his saddle horn, following it from place to place geographically and writing this massive tome on all of this geography. And in one place, he says he is camping with Condor, a fellow named Condor, on top of Tal el-Hammam. They're actually camping on top of el-Hammam. They mention it by name. And he says, which of these sites is Sodom? We don't know. But of all of these cities, we can see all these mounds, ruined mounds, that we can see from the top of el-Hammam. These surely must be the cities of the plain. And which one is Sodom? We don't know, but this is the right location. And so they made a case for it. Now, I didn't see any of that from them until after I had already sort of run the table on the geography myself. But so I was sort of the first one kind of in, now I can't say the only one, because as I go back and look in some sources, even like the Zondervan Bible Encyclopedia, if you look up Zoar, the scholar who wrote that article on Zoar actually favors a northern Sodom.
That's
now,
interesting.
In the same Bible Encyclopedia, if you go to Sodom, I think it was R.K. Harrison wrote that, and he actually says, it seems like a northern Sodom makes more sense, but I'm not an archaeologist, and Albright is, so I'll go with whatever Albright said. And he went to the south end of the Dead Sea, which is kind of an unfortunate thing that happened there. But in fact, as I was reading that article, reading R.K. Harrison's argument for the northern Sodom, I'm saying, good, yes, right,
Gotcha.
Exactly. And then he waffled and went south with Albright. So
Gotcha.
anyway, it can be kind of frustrating, but
I bet
the truth of the matter is that there are no cities even remotely from the time of Abraham located in the southern end of the Dead Sea. As I said, they were all out of business by around 2500 BC. Certainly the walled towns were. And there were a few open villages down there, down to about 2300, 2200 BC. But remember, even in the old Usher chronology, Abraham was born around 2166 BC. So all those towns were out of business long before Abraham was born. So how could they possibly be Sodom? They can't. Archaeologically, it's just a non-starter.
So you date Abraham to when, and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah to when?
Yeah, archaeologically and culturally, Abraham belongs to the Middle Bronze II period for a whole lot of reasons. One of those reasons, big reasons, is that every city mentioned in the Abraham narratives was non-existent from 2500 BC to around 1800 BC. Jerusalem didn't exist in that time frame. So Hebron, Jerusalem, Dan, Damascus, Shechem, none of those cities was operational during what we call the Intermediate Bronze Age, and even during the Middle Bronze I period. So if there is no Jerusalem until around 1800 BC, then if you put Abraham prior to that time, where's the Jerusalem for Melchizedek? It isn't there. And the fact of the matter is that there are no highland sites at all in the Cisjordan highlands, that highland spine where Hebron and Jerusalem and Shechem are all located. None of those cities were operational from 2500 BC down to about 1800 BC. So culturally, archaeologically, historically, Abraham absolutely, without doubt, without discussion, belongs post 1800 BC.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. Now, just really quickly, if Tel el-Hammam is on the eastern side in Jordan, are there any unique challenges to doing an archaeological dig in a primarily Muslim country as opposed to if you were on the west side of the Jordan? Or is it really not a big distinction?
No pun intended, but I really do like digging into that subject.
Wow.
It's interesting. I don't know of too many Israeli archaeologists, very few. I'd say maybe 1-2% of Israeli archaeologists would even say that Abraham, Isaac were real people. They don't accept the historicity. I'd say 98% of Israeli archaeologists do not accept the historicity of the patriarchal narratives.
Wow,
In
98.
fact, most would say the Torah narratives are pretty much out and out fiction.
Hmm.
And that sounds shocking, but it's just actually true. There just aren't very many that would do that, would accept Abraham as a real person and his story as real history. What's interesting in Jordan, because in the Muslim faith, Abraham is a prophet. Lot is a prophet. Okay? Now that makes it interesting because the story of Lot and the evil cities and Abraham that we find in the Bible is in one way or another is in the Quran about 15 times. And so there is no way that a faithful Muslim, even a marginal Muslim, is going to deny the historicity of Abraham. So I always tell my Jordanian colleagues, my Muslim colleagues, and we have several on our team every time we're in Jordan. I always tell them, it's interesting. You guys are more biblically conservative than your Israeli counterparts. And I always find this to be kind of interesting, but it's just true. They accept the story as correct and historical. And so the other question is, they have, how do they deal with the location? How do they deal with the location? Many of them have, went south with everybody else, kind of traditionally. A lot of them, so many of them believe it's underneath the water of the Dead Sea, which is geologically impossible. But so getting them to buy off on the northern location on el-Hammam as Sodom, at least in the hardcore archaeological community, has not been the easiest thing. Some have bought it, some buy it. Some of the top archaeologists in Jordan buy it, but some are resistant. But most of the tour guides now are going to our site and bringing tourists to our site of Sodom. By the way, if you do a little Google Earth search for Tal el-Hammam and fly down to it, you will see that it is identified as Sodom. They're now identified on Google as Sodom. In fact, we had a Chinese, I believe he was Chinese tourist, a couple of seasons ago, who just sort of walked up to the site while we were excavating all by himself. And Gary Byers, one of our associate archaeologists, said, talk to him. And he said, well, how did you find it? How did you find our site? Well, I Googled up Sodom and it brought me here.
Wow.
So it's the word is getting out and things are getting corrected. And eventually, all of the proper, Bible historical geographies, we'll get it in the right place, hopefully.
We can update those 1880s Bibles in due time.
Yeah, we can just bring them back. Yeah.
So you said I think you said the 16th season, a couple dozen plus digs at I'm going to say it again, Tal el-Hammam. Walk us through some of the things that you have discovered at this site that you think are pointers towards it being actual Sodom.
Well, one thing is that in Genesis 19:1, it says Lot sat in the gateway of Sodom. That's an interesting little phrase. If somebody sits in the gateway, of course, that means there's a gateway. If there's a gateway, it means there's a fortification. If you don't have a city wall, you don't need a gate to go through it. So this is a fortified city. One of the first big things we discovered was the gateway of Sodom. We actually think there's actually a stone bench in that gateway, and some rooms inside were a pillared entry hall that where Lot would have sat. So that was pretty cool to be able to actually discover the gateway of Sodom mentioned in Genesis 19:1. And then eventually, of course, the city wall. On the lower city, nobody ever built over it at all. There's about a 700-year occupational gap between the time of the destruction of Sodom and the building of what in essence is a Solomonic or Davidic or Solomonic store city in the Iron Age 2 period on top, starting around 1000 BC. So there's about, imagine the best watered agricultural land in the region going offline for 700 years and nobody being able to have a settlement there. And that was because among the discoveries, and as I mentioned earlier, we have a massive gateway, one of the biggest complicated gateway systems ever discovered in that part of the world. It has a massive city wall going around the lower city and another fortification around the upper city. We have temple areas, we have domestic areas, we have palace areas, everything a big, famous, powerful city, everything you'd want to find. But one of the big smoking guns about this being biblical Sodom is that around 1700 BC, give or take 50 years, the city was destroyed by a massive meteoritic airburst. I'm going to string a bunch of words out here, Sean.
Sure.
And we might pick up on them. So I would say meteoritic, airburst, bolide explosion that with the power 1,000 times greater than the Hiroshima bomb exploded over the area, obliterating 400 square kilometers, including the city itself, and left a churned mess of ash and debris, anywhere from a half meter to 2 meters thick across the entire site. We find melt products in that churned up matrix, which we lovingly call the Cuisinart effect. It literally looks like somebody took the entire contents of the city, threw it in a blender and hit the button. It's that churned up and destroyed. And that includes the people as well, bits and pieces of people. But amongst those bits and pieces, we find, for example, pottery sherds with surfaces melted into glass, showing things like melted zircon crystals or boiled zircon crystals. By the way, at what temperature does a zircon crystal boil? About 3,900 degrees Celsius. It's about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. There isn't anything terrestrially that can produce those kinds of temperatures. And this is superficial melt glass, which means that whatever massively hot burst of energy exploded the city, it only lasted for a blink of an eye. It did not last very long. Otherwise, these pieces of melt product would be totally melted and slumped into glass. We have melted mud bricks. We have melted pieces of pottery. There are all kinds of micro indicators like iridium and osmium and rare earth elements that only come out of cosmic objects that are all through that destruction layer. So, by the way, there's a paper that people should read if they want to. It's a scientific paper published a year ago in Nature Scientific Reports. And you can just Google up Hammam airburst, Nature Scientific Reports, and it will get you to that. It's the title of it is basically a Tunguska-sized airburst destroyed Tal el-Hammam in the southern Jordan Valley in the Middle Bronze Age. And
now, did you author this, or did somebody else?
Close.
Did somebody else author that paper, or are you one of the co-authors for that?
I did not want to be one of the co-authors because I'm not an astrophysicist, and the guys on the paper are airburst experts, and they study this kind of stuff for a living. And so there's 21 authors on that paper. It's an international team. By the way, most of the people on that paper are not people of faith. They are not Christians.
Interesting.
They are simply scientists who study these kinds of airburst events. And so we have determined, isn't it interesting, Sean, that we have not only the cities, not only are the cities of the plain not mythical, they actually do exist, and they're there in a big way. They were destroyed exactly as the Bible describes their destruction in Genesis. Fire and burning stone, sometimes translated goprit, sometimes translated sulfur or brimstone. But actually, the base meaning of the word is just burning stone. Several times in the Old Testament, it's actually translated lightning, but it just refers to burning stone. What does burning stone and fire from out of the heavens actually sound like? It sounds awfully like an asteroid or a comet fragment coming in through the atmosphere, exploding into a plasmic mass and impacting upon the surface, not leaving a crater, but impacting at a very high temperature on the surface and obliterating everything in its path. This is exactly what happened at el-Hammam and the associated towns around it. And I'm just tickled pink over that. By the way, we're not surprised, are we? Are we surprised that we when we find the city of Sodom that's confirmed scientifically that was actually destroyed by fire from Yahweh out of the heavens? Now, of course, the scientific paper doesn't say that Yahweh did it, right? I mean, you can't scientifically come to the conclusion that God actually did this destruction. But it's pretty interesting that it's in the right place, it's in the right time frame, and it's destroyed exactly as the Bible describes its destruction. It is a cosmic event. It's nothing short of a cosmic event. Some people did suggest that maybe some hydrocarbon gas belched out of the ground as a result of an earthquake, flew up in the air, caught on fire and landed on the cities, came back down and landed on the cities. But there are plenty of words in Hebrew to describe all of that. If it actually happened, that would be a terrestrial event. That would be the ground belching fire, not the sky. The text clearly says, Sean, fire and burning stone, brimstone, if you like, from Yahweh out of the heavens. It's coming out of the cosmos. It's not a terrestrial event. And that's exactly what we have.
Okay, so let me sum this up and tell me if I got this right. This city, Tel al-Hammam, northeast of the Dead Sea. Bustling big city with big walls, its own water source. Up to the time that you would date Abraham to, massive destruction, and 21 different scientists that are experts in this, not Christians, agree that there's some kind of top-down burst that involves extremely hot temperatures, levels the region in the area for about 7 centuries, and then later life starts to return back to there in ways that it is in somewhat today. Is that a fair summary of the case?
That's a fair summary.
Okay.
And it's of course we anticipated that when that scientific paper was published, and by the way, it did go. If a scientific paper can go viral, it went viral. It got over it is now way over 500,000 downloads.
That's
and
incredible.
reads. It's actually the most as far as they know, it's the most accessed scientific paper in the history of scientific papers that they know of. It's just usually scientific papers are read by a handful of scientists who care about that stuff. But this one just went crazy, and there was because of that. There was a lot of pushback.
Sure.
There were a lot of scientists who are just anti-Bible folks who just, and the paper does mention that maybe perhaps this explosive event was the historical kernel that eventually gave rise to the Sodom story in the Bible. They actually say that. Well, the anti-Bible folks went ballistic over that and really pushed back, made all kinds of accusations of that photographs were faked and this was faked and that was faked and why would these guys do that? Nobody bothered to answer that. Why would you fake any of this? But anyway, it went through a first peer review, of course, to get published initially. Then, because of some of the accusations that were made, it went through a second peer review and remained passed, and it has now gone through a third peer
Really?
review on the basis of some additional stuff. And now the editors have basically, I think, thrown up their hands and said, enough is enough. The more you guys gripe, the more you guys try to overturn this paper, the more is demonstrated that it's actually factual, and they have more evidence than they published. So, and there's already a second paper in the works.
Are you aware of
yeah.
any other type phenomena like this in Israel, in other parts of the Middle East? Or do these scientists say this is a unique phenomena we haven't seen the likes of anywhere?
Yeah, it's not unique at all, in fact. Tunguska, Siberia, 1908 was the most famous airburst, of course. That particular one burned and flattened 2,500 square kilometers of Siberian forest in the blink of an eye.
Holy cow.
In 1908, that's a well-documented airburst. If you remember Chelyabinsk, Russia, there was an airburst there that it was about 10 miles high in the atmosphere, so it didn't do a lot of damage, didn't kill anybody. But had it exploded a mile above the surface, been a little bit larger object, then hundreds of thousands or millions of people could have died. But there is now an accepted airburst over Tel Harera, northern, kind of in Mesopotamia, and during the Neolithic period. So these things are obviously, they don't happen every day,
Sure.
maybe every century or every decade, but they do happen frequently enough that scholars, I think there are over 500 of them documented by NASA.
Oh, wow.
And of one size or another. But of these killer bolide events, like Tunguska would have been, had there been any people there. By the way, if the same event that hit Tal el-Hammam hit London or LA or any big city today, they would be obliterated, all of it, and all the counties around it. That's how big this event was.
Wow.
So it was very powerful, and I think that's a smoking gun. I mean, if the Bible says Sodom is in a particular place, and it's very clear that it's in a particular cultural time frame or cultural horizon, and in fact the cities are actually destroyed by a means precisely as the Bible describes it. I mean, those are three things that converge together to say, hey, this is Sodom. This is Sodom in the cities of the plain. The other question is, if it isn't, then by all means, biblically, tell us what it is.
That's because a good question.
The only thing that the Bible puts on this particular piece of real estate is the cities of the plain, Sodom and the cities of the plain. The only other thing to happen on that piece of real estate is Moses coming there, bringing the children of Israel there, called the Plains of Moab, where they camped before they crossed over the river, the Jordan, to Jericho. So this is that area. And what's really interesting is that you can almost feel Moses looking at his familiarity of this area in Genesis 13 when he says it's watered like Egypt. Well, if somebody grew up in Egypt, I think that would be one of the first things they would think of. Wow, this thing overflows its banks just like the Nile. This looks like a Nile in miniature. Oh, it's watered like Egypt. And he actually says that. So there are all kinds of connectors here. But if this isn't Sodom, then I think we have to unidentify Jerusalem.
Oh, wow.
Right?
That's
And I'll tell you why. Because if you look at biblical geographical indicators for the location of cities, a site like Jericho has about 7 or 8 or 10 indicators. Jerusalem, which is the second highest by number of geographical indicators for its location, Jerusalem has 16 geographical points of detail. for its location. Guess how many Sodom has? It's number one, by the way. Sodom is the number one geographically identified site in the whole Old Testament. It has 25 separate geoindicators as to its location. And so I always say, if Tal Hammam isn't Sodom, which all the geoindicators point to, then if Tal Hammam isn't Sodom, then how can we say Jerusalem is Jerusalem? Because there are no inscriptions in ancient Jerusalem, in the city of David excavations or any other excavations to say this is Jerusalem. How do we know? Because of geography. We forget that geographical arguments are very, very powerful if we have a lot of known geodata to work with. And with Sodom, we have so much geodata to work with that it's pretty much a no-brainer. People say, well, you discovered the city of Sodom. I said, well, let's put it this way. If someone handed me a map of California and I followed that map to Los Angeles, I cannot then claim to be the discoverer of Los Angeles. I used the map. Same thing here. The Bible gives us a really, really good map of the location of Sodom. All we did was draw the map, pick up the map, and we found the cities. It was absolutely as simple as that. So the Bible is the one that locates it, finds it for us, and all we did was just simply pay attention to what it said and follow the directions.
Now, you've written a book where you lay this out called Discovering the City of Sodom, and this was written about 10 years ago. And what I love is there's stories and there's adventure, and it's story-filled with the facts. So it's well written. It's just an enjoyable, insightful read. But that was 10 years ago.
That was 10 years ago.
Which is amazing. What would you include now that you didn't then, that you presumably think the case is even stronger?
I would, of course, we had not excavated any of the palace. And the palace is, I think, our most spectacular thing to date. So a lot of the palace stuff, a lot of the cultural stuff, the pottery, a lot of just the finds that we have. But there's a suggestion in that book about a meteoritic airburst event. Mm-hmm. But we did not. But the scientific research was just barely beginning, and so to be able to say have a good solid chapter written by the airburst scientists themselves would be really, really good. But I mean, basically, the nuts and bolts of it is the same. That's the book that we point people to as far as being able to hash through the geography and work through all of that. And by the way, what's interesting about that book to me is that it was published by the enemy, so to speak. It was published by Simon and Schuster, by the Howard Book Division of Simon and Schuster. So normally you don't get something that supports the Bible very much being published by them. So we got kind of a kick out of that they actually agreed to do that.
Now, you hinted at this earlier, but how is your case being received just in the archaeological community, in the Bible scholarly community, believers, non-believers? Where's it at?
It's a mix. Right now, in the world of archaeology, we always say it takes about 40 years for discoveries in the field to find their way into popular acceptance. And I always wanted it to happen a little bit faster than that, because if that's true, I won't be around when people start actually accepting that. So, but I would say this: there are a good number of good scholars who buy it, who understand it. And by the way, I have never we have a lot of scholars troop by when we're on the dig, when we're excavating at Tal Hammam. We have a number of scholars over the years who come there, and we always take them up, and I give them what we call the talk from the top. We stand on the very top of the tell. You can see the whole Jordan Valley. We tell the story of Abraham and how we locate the city of Sodom, because you can see everything about it from there. And at the end of that little talk, I say little talk, sometimes it lasts for quite a while. Gary Byers is over here shaking his head. Yeah. Um, we could call it the torture from the top, I guess we could say. But the talk from the top, they always say this: "Wow, uh, I just never knew. I never thought." And they say it's pretty obvious, isn't it? And everybody who's been up there, in fact, Herschel Shanks, before we wrote that article, he asked us to write that article for BAR. He came out to the site, and he got the talk from the top, and he turned to me, and he said, "It's pretty obvious, isn't it?" I said, "Well,
Wow.
yeah." And he says, "I tell you what, why don't you just do a little bit on the geography because it's so obvious, and do more on the destruction?" So we kind of leaned a little bit more toward the destruction in that article. But I remember when Dr. Lane Rittmeyer, who's the archaeological architect, who's done the plan and site drawings for reconstruction drawings for most every excavation in Israel, for sure, and some in Jordan. When he first came up to the site, he came as our architect. When he first came up to the top of the site, and I gave him the talk from the top, his response was the same, but he added a little bit. He said, "Wow, it's really obvious, isn't it?" And he said, "All I ever heard was that Collins thinks that Tal Hammam is Sodom, and he won't listen to anybody else." And well, that was true. I mean, I will always listen to somebody if they actually have something to add.
Sure.
That's important to say. But I would say by this time that there probably isn't any angle to this that we haven't heard, dealt with, discussed. No question that has been. Nobody's going to ask a question. But after dealing with this for 20 some odd years, I haven't found anybody able to ask a question that we can't deal with or haven't already dealt with. It's pretty, I think it's a done deal. I think it's not a theory anymore. I just think it's a fact. And so what other people will do with it, there are still those who buy the old Usher chronology and think Abraham belongs in the 22nd century, 21st century BC, which is not even archaeological or historically possible, but they still hold to that. Once you get Abraham in the right place, in the right cultural setting, then I think there's no other way to go, because the geography and the archaeology of the southern sites just doesn't hold water at all. So I really encourage people to read that book, Discovering the City of Sodom.
Yeah, it's great.
Grab a
I
copy
thoroughly
of it
enjoyed it.
and turn to it, and just check it out themselves. Read. In fact, Sean, you'll appreciate this as a Bible scholar and a teacher. I had a group of doctoral students one day, and this was like way before we ever started even thinking about excavating at Tal Hammam. But I was doing the study on the geography of Sodom. So we gave them, there were nine of them, I think. We divided them into three groups. And we said, look at the first 12 chapters of Genesis 13, 1 to 12. Did I say chapters? The first 12 verses of Genesis 13.
Sure.
And tell me where Sodom is. They didn't know anything about anything. They knew nothing of our thinking, nothing about it. We gave it to all three groups. They were to work together and study the issue. And I said, just follow the text. Don't look outside. Don't read what anybody else has to say. Just take the text and run it. Run the table with the text and tell me where you wind up. So we all got together. Every group, of course, had a spokesman, and they stood up and they gave us what they came up with, and every single one of them put Sodom north and east of the Dead Sea.
Very interesting.
And so I just tell people, read the text, Genesis 13, 1 to 12, very carefully, run the table geographically without asking anybody else. Just go get a good Bible map and look where all of these things are, and then triangulate around, and I think you will have the same conclusion about the location of Sodom that the 19th century scholars had, and that most of the 20th century scholars will have, or 21st century scholars, or maybe it'll be the 22nd century get there. But I think that opinion is going to change, it's going to shift, because the evidence is hard. It's not soft. I think it's really hard.
So last question for you. I'm curious what you think this discovery proves, because I'm sure some people would say, look, maybe there was this fiery destruction like you described, and the cities, somebody observed this and wove the legend or mythology of the story of Sodom around these known historical events. How would you respond or interact with that claim?
Well, I always say everything we're finding is commensurate with Scripture. I mean, it absolutely matches everything we know about the story of Sodom and its location and its demise. Everything about that. And what I say to people is, all you can do is put that on your personal believe-o-meter. Because after that, you just say, okay, it's exactly where the Bible says it is. All these things line up perfectly. So what? It's all a coincidence. You could say that. You could say it's just a coincidence. But I think scientifically, it's not a coincidence. There are too many things that line up. The statistical chance that all of this would just line up accidentally is so far off that you don't even want to go there. The problem, Sean, is the Bible. They're just people who don't want the Bible to be true. It could have something to do with the fact that the Bible talks about God, and if the Bible is true in any way, shape, or form, they might just have to answer to God. They don't want to do that, so they try to keep the Bible at arm's length. And they can always say, well, it could be just a coincidence that this city matches everything that the Bible talks about regarding Sodom. What does that prove? Well, ultimately, I suppose it doesn't prove anything other than this, other than that the Bible at the geographical level and at the historical level is accurate. That's all we can say. You can't pull these things apart. Everything about the location, everything about the description of the city, everything about everything about it. That's a good way to say it. Lines up with Scripture. Scripture and what we're finding at el-Hammam line up. Does that prove Scripture? Well, I could say, well, okay, if you don't want to use the word prove, what else would you say? Confirms? Yes. It's a one-to-one correspondence, Sean. What else would you say? I suppose most people in most fields, if you took the Bible out of it, would say it proves it. It proves it. But when it comes to the Bible, people don't like to use the word prove or proof. Because what they mean by that is, we don't mind if you say it demonstrates the historical character of the Bible, but we don't want you telling us that it somehow then confirms the theology, that it confirms the existence of God, or it confirms the religious aspect of it. That's what they're really thinking. They don't like the idea of using archaeology to prove the Bible, because that's doing archaeology with an agenda. Well, okay, I can do Civil War archaeology, and I can follow manuscripts and ideas and histories and go to battlefields and try to dig up stuff and look at stuff. And what am I doing? I'm using historical documents and documentation and checking it out via an archaeological process. What's the difference? There's no difference. There's no difference. We're using historical texts, ancient texts that exist, using the information in those ancient texts to take us to locations and to give us an idea about what might be there. And if it turns out to be there, is that a proof that the document is true, is accurate? Well, it's at least this. It's at least a demonstration that there is information in that document or in those documents that should be taken seriously. So I just tell people, you've got to deal with it in your own. People of faith who already trust the Bible as the Word of God do not have a problem with fire and burning stone coming from out of the heavens from Yahweh and destroying an entire civilization in the blink of an eye. They have a problem with that. Why? Because God can do that. If God can create, the whole universe just by his word, what is the big deal about taking one of those rocks in his massive universe and flinging it in the right direction at exactly the right time in the right place? Not a problem. It's just not a problem for us who accept that God really exists.
Sure.
It's the people that don't that get really nervous when we start saying that archaeology demonstrates the historical nature of the text. I don't have a problem with that at all. I don't have a problem using the word prove, even though I will admit that in my archaeology classes, I always tell people that we can't use archaeology to prove the Bible.
Sure.
We've heard that for so long, and we don't want people just dragging the Bible out in their archaeology and just trying to do archaeology from that perspective. You have to do the whole. Archaeologists have to look at everything. You dig through it, you got to document it, you got to deal with it, biblical or not. But in this case, when archaeology screams one-to-one correspondence with the biblical text, why should we be nervous to say, oh, this must have really happened?
Okay.
Now, if you don't want to believe in God, then you can say it's a big coincidence. A rock fell out of the sky, a meteoritic airburst blew up, and maybe that gave rise to an etiological legend that eventually found its way into the Bible as the story of Sodom. Okay, by the way, if I could get all my liberal colleagues to just admit that, I'd be happy as a client.
Maybe let's start there.
If they just say, okay, if they would just admit, and it is a fact that the city of Sodom actually did exist. Okay, the myth theory that they've always held is gone. That's just gone. So what's left? Well, we have an airburst. Okay, if the fire out of the sky is also not a myth, then where do we go from there? Anybody with a scientific head on their shoulders is going to say, wait a minute, there's too many little elements happening here that to be a coincidence. All this has to be connected somehow. How it's connected? Don't know. Maybe you don't want to say God did it. Maybe you don't want to go there, but you have to at least admit the geography. You have to at least admit the astrophysics part of it, that it does line up. So what do you do with that? I know what I do with it.
Sure. That's a great way to leave it with a question is if people don't accept your conclusions, they've got to come up with a better explanation of why it matches up in the way you laid out. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. This is the second show I've done on the search for Sodom and Gomorrah. Did a show with my friend Joel Kramer on the case for the southern site a few months back. Link to that below. You can check it out. I'd also encourage you to check out Discovering the City of Sodom, where you lay out a lot of the evidence. There's a ton of charts in here that were really helpful for me to kind of situate it visibly within the land of Israel and Jordan. Really appreciate you coming on. For those of you watching, make sure you hit subscribe. We've got some other programs coming up you will not want to miss, including an interview with a leading exorcist coming up early in January. A number of other shows you will not want to miss. Make sure you hit subscribe. And if you thought about studying apologetics, we'd love to have you in our distance program here at Biola. We have the top-rated master's program, totally distance now. And archaeology is one of the topics that we cover. Dr. Collins, really appreciate you coming on. Fascinated by the work that you're doing. This is such a fun program. Thanks for carving out the time, and I will be tracking. I've subscribed to your newsletter, and I know a lot of folks watching can just search for you online, subscribe to the newsletter just to see updates that you send about the finds and new studies. If they want to track that would be a great source. Thanks so much for coming on.
I appreciate it, Sean. Enjoyed it.